Meeting is now streaming live on YouTube. Kim Perkins is a PhD in positive psychology, and we're going to be talking about the psychology of belief. Welcome, Kim.
Great to be here, Andrew.
Thanks for joining us. Let me just mute that. There we go. Cool. So we've had a lot of interesting things going on these days with different beliefs and conspiracy theories, and some conspiracies are true, some are not, and we need to kind of get into a better place of understanding where we're coming from, because I feel that we're struggling with a lot of sort of erosion of the collective truth, collective idea of what's true. I've been seeing things largely as sort of herd patterns of thought that we're sort of undulating through, which shouldn't be a surprise, but it's sort of a wake-up call to us all that we're really more of a herd creature to begin with. And we like to think of ourselves as singular entities of rational thought, but that's not exactly true, is it?
Yes, the idea in psychology, and I'm sure you know this from all basic epistemology, excuse me, I'm thinking about epidemiology, is that knowledge can be socially constructed. And so that is the perspective that often makes the most sense these days, rather than saying you can be a positivist and say that knowledge is out here and it's something that we go out and acquire and it is the same at all times without us. But we're living in a world now where it makes more sense to think of it as socially constructed, meaning that the place where your knowledge and my knowledge meet is the reality that we agree upon, but there may be things outside of that. So because now we're in a place with technology where we can have lots of people having the soapbox for their ideas and pick up on lots of different ideas, then that makes for kind of a multiverse of realities rather than just one.
Yeah, I think about it as just like everyone's a publisher now. Everyone's got their own newspaper, and we're not necessarily taking full responsibility for that power. But then again, it's sort of, it whittles itself down to a bit of power because everyone's doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And that can also mean that people have big fights over small shades of meaning. And I know I've been sucked into this a lot myself, where what are the various, we see a small bit of somebody's 140 characters of thought. We take issue with one of the words because we're assuming that they're interpreting in this way when we want them to interpret it in this way. And then there's all kind of fighting because this can go on endlessly.
Yes, with the semantics. And I find that to be really, usually just semantics with most people I meet. It's like, well, you use that word and that means this to me. And so we basically start arguing about this thin little edge of thing because we didn't define our terms. And then we automatically just polarize because of identity protective cognition, right? We just kind of polarize and start attacking, even if we're not on the opposite side on the issue. We're just decided to take opposition sides.
Absolutely. It's a real problem right now, if you ask me, because a lot of the things that we would do in person, which is looking for places of convergence, and being able to kind of see who a person is and vibe with them, we don't have those available to us in the public sphere because everything's mediated by technology. And also we are, especially right now when we're kept physically separate from each other, it's really hard for us to use those finely tuned convergence technologies that we've evolved over many years of living together in tribes.
Yeah, it would be nice if Facebook and other social media, they switched their algorithms to deliberately put people in opposition viewpoints together, take them out of their echo chambers and go, hey, have this conversation right now.
I don't know if that's even possible right now. Right. I think I'll tell you what, I've been a person who like a fringe group person for a long time. And by that, I don't mean that I'm necessarily believing strange things, but what I mean is that I really like to talk with people who have different beliefs than I do. And this is a very hard time because of the depth of polarization, which is that there's hardly anything you can agree on. Everything is, you say tomato, I say tomato.
So how would you explain that? Why are we so polarized today from a psychological viewpoint?
Well, from a psychological viewpoint, we are now divorced. Like I was saying earlier with technology, we're now divorced from geography. And there used to be a lot of reasons why we would come into contact with the same people over and over, and we would have a reason to have a tribe because it was kind of geographically based. We would have, you probably heard from technology spaces that were built for a tribe of about 150 people from an evolutionary standpoint. And that's, you know, that's what we're optimized for. But we find those people like all over the world and in much greater distances from each other. And so that means that we don't actually have to deal with a whole of other beings very often in our little pod here. You know, even we deal with more and more different people in smaller and smaller slices of behavior and actions and intent, and we don't. And so we are at a time when I think also influenced by capitalism, where everything becomes a consumer product, and we're constantly going, I wonder what kind of beer expresses my identity. And we're so very focused on who we are and what we believe in and what tiny wrinkles of things that it's very hard to get out of that sort of narcissistic trap and connect with other human beings when everything in our culture is pointing us to notice our differences rather than our commonalities.
Wow. So this is, that really explains the idea of identity politics rather than solution politics.
Exactly. And I think that, you know, we're at a time now where we are either called to change our stories to include more people and more of the reality around us, or come back smaller and decide not to and live much smaller lives. But right now, to me is part of our period of chaos, is where we're being called to enlarge.
Yeah. So can you explain to us how we get from a position of not knowing really anything about an issue to the position of conviction and just strong belief that this is the only way it can be?
Ah, yes, isn't that fun? There's so much research being done on this now, which is amazing. So I will caveat what I'm going to say, knowing that in the next few years, I think we're going to see a great blossoming of research in this field. But I'm going to go back to an idea that you may have heard of because it was part of a Nobel Prize winner's research. The idea that we have two kinds of thinking. We have system one and system two. And so I'm talking about Kahneman and Tversky here from the 1970s. And the idea is system one thinking is kind of what we think about with our gut reactions and our immediate responses. And so this is something that this is in the way when our amygdala gets triggered, and it's just an automatic reaction. And this is a way of knowing and seeing, and our gut instincts that is built in to human systems, that it served us very well for figuring out what we need to do with things that are right here in front of us, generally physically based, and right here in time also, right? There are things that are about now, today, tomorrow. And then there's also systems two thinking, which is about more of the prefrontal cortex. And that one is about abstractions, planning, statistics, which is such a non-human way of thinking about things, and yet a way that we must when we're trying to think about things that are happening later in time, further away from us, not in the immediate, for our immediate survival.
So if we're not in the habit of thinking in statistics or system two, we're just not in the habit of that, we're going to get exhausted very quickly, right? Because the prefrontal cortex takes a lot of energy.
It takes a lot of energy, and you also have to set aside a lot of the information that's coming from system one in terms of the feelings that you get in your body and the things that the creative lateral ways your mind is moving. And so it's very taxing. And so what that means for us, though, is that a lot of our system one thinking is really what guides our opinions and thoughts about things, where we're putting things together into a pattern based on what we've seen before, based on experiences we've had, feelings in the body, etc., rather than thinking about it out here in terms of things that will hold up 5 years from here or 5,000 miles from here. And that interface between the two, we have access to both. But a lot of times what happens, and when I say a lot of times, I want to be really clear that we should not be trying to use system two all the time. We have system one for a reason. And trying to ditch it is kind of like trying to gouge our own eyes out. Why would we want to do that? But we often treat system two problems in a system one way. I'll give you an example. So, I'm a person of color, and I have relatives in rural Idaho, which is a pretty white place, and I'm from California, and I'm a PhD person. And so basically, when I went to go rent a car there to go visit my relatives, and I flew into Idaho Falls, they said, "Oh, would you like one with California plates?" And I'm like, "No, thank you. I have enough problems driving through rural Idaho, right? This seems scary." So we're in a snowstorm, and I drive my California car because it turned out that was the only one they had. They were just trying to make me feel good about it. I'm driving my car with my California plates, and it turns out not to have snow tires. And in I go in the middle of nowhere into a snowbank. And I thought, oh man, now I am really in trouble. And so a car comes by, and the first car that comes by, they stop and they're like, "Oh, hello, what part of California are you from? Would you like some help here?" Of course. And they couldn't get me out. So another person, the very next person on the road also stops. Everybody is stopping for me. I've got 5 people out there trying to help me. Now, it's a system one problem, right? I'm right here. I need help. You're going to help me. If we were to say, "Would you like to make some legislation to help out people of color from California?" These same people would say, "Absolutely not," because that's a system two problem, right? And so it's sometimes I see a lot of the disconnect that people see between the two ways of thinking comes out in a lot of our political things, where we have those natural tendencies where we want to help people, we want to be connected, and yet we're doing our system two thinking in a completely different way.
Right. So, yeah, so system one's, I mean, it's high survival. It's like, this is going to keep us alive, especially if there's a dangerous situation. But we don't have as many actually dangerous situations today as we might have. And so we're sort of jumping into this fight or flight instinctual responses a lot more often to get things done. And that's just our programming. That's just how the brain works, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just how it works. And so again, because we're living in a system two world where what we do today with, butterfly effect or whatever you call it, causes unknown, through various connections, things way far away from us. It's often very difficult to figure out what we need to do and where truth is between the system two answer and the system one answer.
So what I see a lot on social media is that people sort of pick a side and then they're sort of loyal to that side, and then sort of like confirmation bias wise, they just keep going on that side. They just want to keep the coherence of that story is all they really care about. And so they keep, certain people just, maybe they even claim to be in the middle of the road, but they just keep posting all the same agendaed items. And if they argue with somebody, it's always from that same angle. Even though they might, if they really had time to just think about it, they might find that they're really kind of in the middle and they agree with a little of both viewpoints, right?
It's true. And that part of that is another wonderful part of our confirmation bias, you can say, of our various biases that we have. And one of them is for consistency. We have a really strong bias for consistency in our own arguments. And yet reality is kind of messy and will not really let us boil it down to something that we find consistent, but we would rather be consistent than be right on certain levels. Yeah. And so, and again, that's kind of our move toward resonance rather than evidence, where we want it to all kind of feel right and make sense together and hang together. And we have a really strong urge toward that, that kind of storytelling. Whereas evidence is always more mixed and therefore less satisfying.
So we're dealing with this on a regular basis now. What do you see as the answer here? How do we take this splitting rope of our collective worldview, if you will, or the collective agreement on what is true, just sort of unraveling? How do we sort of start to weave that rope back together? I mean, maybe it's good that it's breaking apart, because there are a lot of loyalist preconceptions of reality that aren't really true at all and need to be challenged. But how do we start to weave this back together? How do we get that epistemological approach to be rational and intelligently thought through?
What a great question, and one that I wish I could just say, oh, it's easy, we'll just do X, right? But what I do think is, you know, when you think about system one and system two, it's using the system one's methods to affect system two. To put that in less abstract terms, we like to be connected with people, and we like to have people, you know, a people first mentality will probably allow you to expand your worldview to take in more facts. So it's difficult to do. It's a really big issue as far as changing what you see. But when you know, a lot of our science teaches us to be very reductive in our thinking, and a lot of, you know, and I find this again in my work with technology companies and technologists, is that we want to say, oh, okay, so it's just, we're going to analyze it down, and here are the 5 factors that actually matter, and the rest of them don't matter. Well, you can't do that anymore. We're living in a world where context really matters, and it does not work in a mechanical sense the way we are often taught. This is more of an organismic sense, when there's all kinds of other factors that are coming in that have to be accounted for. So what I'm working on is, rather, instead of thinking about things in terms of critical thinking, a lot of times when people say critical thinking, they mean really looking just at the reasons why this might not be true. And that doesn't go far enough to me.
Yeah,
that doesn't go far
skepticism is not enough. I get you.
Skepticism is not enough, because it will lead you to it'll lead you to a bad place where you can't believe anything, and therefore that nihilism is the only answer, right? And that's not helpful. That's not human centered. We have to believe things,
and it's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
It's exhausting to the brain to keep holding no belief at all, right?
Oh, we're not built for that. We're not built for that. It's exhausting to the brain. And so what we have to do is find a way to say that this is true enough for now, so that we can move forward and remain open to facts that to things that might change that, rather than holding on to them and putting our identities so close to our position that if our position falls, our identity will go with it. So I'm pretty, you know, as a positive psychologist, what we do is think about exemplars. We think about what is good and how can we replicate that. So this is, to me, in many ways, kind of an opposite of critical thinking, in that instead of looking for all the problems and things, I mean, a lot of times when we're trying to solve problems, we think of it sort of like our car engine. It doesn't work. There must be something wrong with it. Let's go find the thing that's wrong, correct that one thing, and then it'll work. And that's not really a useful model for solving problems these days. It's really much more holistic. So instead, as a positive psychologist, we say, okay, what was happening with this engine when it was working? And then we get all the information of what a good working engine looks like. And then we figure out how we can make something that has those same effects as the engine. And so that might sound like, if you're thinking that the engine is, we don't want to remake the system, then that sounds like an awful lot of work. But we're mostly in problems now where we kind of have to maybe make the system, and the system is how we think about our stories and how are each other's stories and how we work with each other. And those systems are not that hard to change. You can do it. You can do it. And small things do it all the time.
So basically, instead of narrowing down and picking things apart, we're trying to open up and go, and what else might work? What other system might work here? It's creative thinking.
It's creative thinking. It's equifinality. It's assuming that there's many ways to get there. And let's pick one that we have seen work as a system in the past, not just as a set of components.
Right. So it's a brainstorm. So how would I, if I wanted to single-handedly change the political viewpoint of the country?
Yes, excellent.
How would I go about talking to people so that they, first of all, listen, and secondly, start being more creative about this, so that they can collaborate to come up with a new way for things like, oh, let's look at healthcare from an expansive angle. Let's look at, you know, the electoral college or abortion or any of these really hot button issues, or American imperialism from an expansive, creative viewpoint.
Yeah. Well, the first thing you have to do is, and this is something that, you know, I have done as a consultant within organizations, is I'm going to describe a process we call appreciative inquiry. And so what that is what do we like that's going well about what we see around us now? So what's going well, and what does good even look like? And so the chances are good that there's going to be a lot more convergence on what good looks like than there is going to be divergence, because humans, even with all of our differences, tends to have more of the same experiences at rock bottom than they do differently. And so our ideas of good, when you ask people what good is, people tend to have a lot of the same answers, and those answers don't contradict each other as much as you'd think. And so by starting off with, we all want something good, what does good look like? Once you peel back a couple of layers of positioning, shall we say, then you come down to things like everybody can get what they need, and people have the freedom, it comes down to freedom and autonomy, and also connectedness, and the ability to give your gifts. These are some of the basic things. And so when you're coming at this, and we start designing a system instead that will, based on what we've already seen works, that can feed those things, that can allow you to have those things. And so I love this approach of what's actually working, because humans are also geared towards seeing the negative first. This is not something we talked about earlier, but this is a really strong effect, I think, in the polarization right now. Yeah, negativity bias, which is, the phrase is the negative is stronger than the positive, because we have a tendency to see problems and make them bigger, because that's what's kept us alive all these years, is to be able to be really responsive to threat. Yes.
I was going to ask, because there's also a positivity bias, I was going to ask if you think that's more culturally informed or evolutionarily conformed, and you just confirmed you think it's more evolutionarily confirmed.
Evolutionally confirmed. So the positivity bias, is when you ask people how their lives are, and they're like, yeah, I'm pretty happy, everything's kind of good, the house is on fire, but I can handle it. And that can be more culturally, that's more culturally attuned, that people want that.
They might not have that as much in Russia.
It's true. They might know. Seriously, Eastern European cultures are much more comfortable with complaint about everyday life than.
Or even just the difference between New York and California. It's like.
It's true. It's true.
Like, how's your day going? To a New Yorker's like, it's kind of awful, actually. Don't ask.
I haven't got a chance. Yeah, exactly. And that's bonding. Whereas in California, that just. It's like, yeah, we want harmony above all things. No, I'm living on the God realm. It's wonderful.
So I have some friends who are high end skeptics. They're very skeptical, and I find that what they're seeming to do to me is they just don't want to engage in any belief at all. They're like afraid of stepping their foot on solid ground and saying, I think this, or I think that, because they're familiar with how easily things are overturned, and that, data fact from today is suddenly, oh, that's not quite accurate anymore. And so it's almost like they're afraid of being caught standing on solid ground, because someone will call them an idiot.
Yes, that's unfortunate, but true. I'm surrounded by that all the time, and I'm guilty of that too, because everybody likes to be right. But the nature of science and logical thinking in the scientific method is that we hold on to an idea for a while until we get new facts that say that that's not what we're doing anymore. Now it's on this, and that's again difficult for people to do in real life, because we like to know what's right, and we like to think that that's going to be right forever, especially when it comes to social science things, which do change, and we. So it's a kind of a defense mechanism for the ego to say, well, that because we can't know the absolute truth that will be here forever, we can't know anything, and so why bother, And that I don't consider that a positive or a tenable way to live, because eventually in life going to have to stand up for something. I mean, adolescents are great at this, right? I will raise my hand as I was one of those sort of more nihilistic adolescents of it's all BS, and
it's a safe stance,
right?
It's a safe stance for the ego, yeah.
It is, and it's a critique of the system that you did not make. So it's ultimately a very low power system that kind of nihilism is something that you can only take on, that only makes sense when you don't have any power to change the system, when you don't feel a lot of personal power and you didn't make the system and you just have to be in it. So sometimes I told skeptics, it's like, you're taking kind of the victim position in this.
And you can't change anything, and you can't be a leader from that standpoint.
You cannot lead from that standpoint. It is impossible to lead from a place of skepticism.
Right. And so you've got someone like Donald Trump, who many feel is overly confident in his beliefs and ideas about things.
Cringe,
which may be true, but at least he's got the right mindset to attempt to lead. Whether he's leading well or not is up for debate.
Well, he's a good salesman. Okay, so as a leadership scholar, I have to say he's a very good salesman, and he does a lot of he says things with confidence, which takes you a very long way. I'm hesitant to say that he actually has beliefs, in kind of the Hamiltonian sense of, Burr has none. I'm kind of like, yeah, he has none, really. I don't think he has deeply held beliefs that he's going back to. I think he's doing a moment to moment, more manipulation stance that is what we see with people with certain personality disorders.
That would,
but he's done enough, but at least campaigning. He's an amazing campaigner, and he did an impression of a person with beliefs very well.
Right. So how do we then get to a place where we are having some sense of conviction or belief, or like getting to, okay, this is what I want to work with, and yet we're a little more nuanced than some people who we would view as being too blunt and not thoughtful enough about reality?
It is really hard to do on social media, because if you were going to say what you really meant, you'd say, marketing message here, asterisk, and then there would be a list of 10 assumptions and caveats that would be necessary for people to really understand your actual position. And that's not going to happen.
Yeah, I so prefer talking in person, because you get the emotional inflection in the voice, you get the facial expression, which is half of communication, essentially.
It is, right, and the response and the mirroring aspects that we have, and that's part of how we come to understand each other as humans. And you can't do that in a lot of social media. I think that's also part of the reason why video has become so popular in social media, is because you can get more of a sense of what people are saying rather than their 140 characters.
Right. And if you just think about the amount of data coming at you in a text message, it's just this tiny amount of data versus the amount of data from a voice alone is like, I don't know how much, probably 10 times as much data is your brain is interpreting. And then you add the visual to it as well. You're talking maybe 100-fold what the amount of data you're getting through a text.
And it's all about humanization. I mean, the convergence that you're talking about, to me, is all about making each other whole humans to each other. That we all have mostly the same experiences, because we do. That's kind of the science of it, is that humans have more in common in terms of their experience on this earth than they do not in common.
Yeah, one of my favorite people of the last 30 years is Daryl Davis, the jazz musician who befriended KKK members.
Oh, right.
And he had conversations with them over meals. He talked to them for years until they retired their cloaks. He's collected like 30 or 40 cloaks because of all the friends he made in the KKK, and just through respectful dialogue. He says, I didn't come in there, he said, trying to convince somebody or change their mind. I just came with respect for their viewpoint. I saw them as a human being who's got some rational ability, who's got a perspective, and even though I don't agree with it, and I never said I did, I respected that person's ability to think and the worldview that they're coming from until we got a little bit more parity. And he said that like most of these people, like after knowing him for long enough, a lot of their white supremacy ideas just didn't hold water anymore. It's like, well, I know somebody who's Black who's just so defies all of these beliefs that I had before. So what am I going to do with that? I'm done. It's the belief eroded itself. It can't hold.
Yes, exactly. And that's what I think, you know, with my scientist hat on, it's hard for me to say that's the approach that works, because it takes a huge amount of time and investment. Um, and there's a certain
And bravery.
bravery, cognitive dissonance that you're trying to invoke in other people. It's like, well, I believe all of this, but then this is the reality before me, you know, and then you're assuming that they're going to go for the reality before me, and then some people aren't, because their identity will be so tied up in this other thing. But that, oh, I had another thought and I forgot what it was.
Yeah.
Things
Well,
we can talk about.
I would love, I would love to have you just tell us a little bit about what, you know, like what's really on your mind right now. What is the most exciting topics that you're playing with today?
I have so much on my mind right now, but this, you know, honestly, a lot of what we're talking about is very top of mind for me, because I'm working on several projects that really touch on these issues. You know, I'm working on an anti-racist project with Linnea Sims of Interplay and Outer Work, where we're making a community to come together and talk about racial issues. And what we're doing is we're basing it on some psychological research and talking about stages of awareness. And I think a lot of the time when people are getting in trouble with each other is because people are at different levels of awareness and readiness to hear things. And we're often asking people who just discovered that maybe race is a thing to act like people who have been dealing with this for 20, 30, 50 years. And it's just not going to happen, because that's not how humans work. And I think it's much kinder if we keep people together with, you know, you don't do college math for kindergartners, you know, and yet I think we throw people into a milieu where we're saying, okay, kindergartners, do college math, and if you don't do it right, we'll be very mad at you. And that's not, you know, that's not going to get more people in that, right? That's not going to teach more people math. And so we're working on basically communities to sort of meet people where they're at, so that they can come understand what's happening here. So, and that to me is definitely a matter of a lot of the stuff that we're talking about in terms of convergence of thinking and those wrinkles between those two.
So let me ask a really provocative, possibly offensive question about racism, because it's been sort of just gradually sort of twisting in my mind for several years now, mostly this year. And I've done racism facilitation. I did a documentary about racism. I was a shooter on a documentary. So I care about this issue a lot. I've invested a fair amount of time and energy in it, but it's the way it's being framed today is beginning to bother me. There's something that feels like there's a racism lens or an oppressed lens that's coming in and saying you have to humble yourself to this oppressed group, minority group, and if you don't, then you're a bad person. And I feel like that's sort of skipping over. It's using identity protective cognition instead of the higher function to understand what's really going on, because we have systemic stereotyping and prejudice, which is built into the brain, right? It's not something you can just turn off. It's like you have to work your way through it by learning and understanding. So there's obviously a whole realm of area where we can grow to become less racially biased, but it doesn't happen through going, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm a white person, you know, like it's just, right? I mean, that's an ineffective way to run it, and it doesn't work in the long run, right? White people humbling themselves doesn't necessarily solve anything. It's more about white people being curious enough to learn, right? Or am I going the wrong direction here?
Well, you know, I think you're talking about some interesting things. So one of the things, you know, I'm going to go back to some work by Helms on racial identity here, and then it's one of the stage theories. So in the first stage, everything's fine, the world is just, everything is as it should be, and I'm not really very aware of being a white person or whatever. And the second stage is like, maybe something's up here, maybe there is something I should attend to. And then the third stage is, holy crap, racism is everywhere. And I think that a lot of people get really stuck in that stage, and they want to say, you know, especially other white people want to come out into the other white people and say, you're not understanding, racism is everywhere. And this is where a lot of the calling out and canceling comes from. It's really other white people doing it. And at the same time, there are Black voices, and I'm using Black because that's the one I'm most familiar with. There's other groups that maybe the marginalized groups here that are refers to are saying, look, if white people, it's great that you're waking up, but if you make this all about you, it's going to perpetuate actual actions that will hurt us. Like, in other words, can you please just let us lead the movement without taking it over? And that's where a lot of the shouting down comes from, because people haven't.
I'm sorry. It's just so ironic, and I'm doing it right now. I'm interrupting you to speak because I'm white and I'm used to speaking.
Well, but see, that's exactly it. And so a lot of those voices are not about, hey, we want you to feel bad. It's about, like, can you please just, I know you're just so in the habit of taking over. Could you just not hear and do your own thing? But right now I don't feel like, and I'm biracial, and my mom's white and my dad's black, and I feel like I would like to I don't want to intrude on I don't want to tell the people who I've not been an advocate for this my entire life. I'm fairly late to the game, right? I don't want to tell them how they ought to do it, but I do want to say, like, people who are wrestling with this, here's a place you can come to and you can wrestle with it, and nobody's going to tell you that you are a bad person, but you're also going to have to deal with those feelings, which honestly are often coming from the white people themselves and not actually being told by the black people. A lot of times
it's a facsimile. It's like a facsimile version of reality, so it's not very authentic.
Well, it's more that you I'm just going to say it right here, is that when people have those feelings of guilt, often they're that's what they call white fragility, where it's kind of on their own, that a black person can go boop and they'll feel like, ah, and so it's hard because the people who are really out there on the front lines doing the work. I mean, some of the people who are doing the protesting in Portland, for example, and people who are all doing protesting all over the United States for Black Lives Matter. It's true. They don't really have time to deal with making sure that all the white people are fully taken care of, and that's real. But at the same time, I think we need to be able to have more spaces where white people can work this out. And I'll just say, my coming to this work meant me dealing with my own whiteness and my own colorism first before I could do anything to actually help Black people. And so there's kind of a more nuanced understanding here, where it's not really a one-to-one, but it's more like there's levels. There's levels, and a lot of that is meant to keep people from taking actions that are actually going to hurt in the long run.
Right.
Did that make any sense? Did that hit?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I feel like white people, like, I totally get the white fragility. I've experienced it multiple times. I suddenly feel attacked, even though what the person is saying isn't necessarily about me personally. And it's just about, it's the system. And it's this sort of shock for a white person who's been unaware of the systemic racism for their whole lives, to go, oh my God, reality is dark and I'm part of an oppressive system. Like, what the hell? And it's like, you feel suddenly like you're being called delusional. Like you're not seeing reality clearly. And they are telling you that. And you're like, how dare you call me ignorant and silly or racist? The term racism is so charged because of the cancel culture. They were like, oh my God, I'm not racist. I'm not racist at all.
It's true. And I think I wrote a piece about it like 2014 that was like, I wish we could retire the word racist, because it doesn't mean what people think it does. I mean, we're living in a society. Racist is a property of a system of thinking in a society. It's not necessarily a property of a person in the way that we often make it out to be. So there's no, like, I am racist AF all the time because I'm a light-skinned person. Even though I'm a person of color, I'm still a light-skinned person who benefits from that privilege, right? And so therefore calling us all racist doesn't really help matters or us thinking about it in those terms, because we're living in a racist society. This is how it's going to be.
It creates the dichotomy, and the fight or flight sort of sprouts up, and then rational thought is not happening anymore.
It's true. And so I'd rather invent some new terms for working on that in a more nuanced way. And again, while leaving the people who've been leading this fight for the last 50 to 100 years, long time, much more experience in it, have already worked all of this out, are thinking about their place in this, keeping us supporting them and letting them do their thing.
Yeah, it's great. So what's one last thing you'd like to really share with us?
Oh man, this has been such a fun conversation because I think about this stuff all the time, and I'm just down in, it's very abstract. um, we're talking about beliefs, and I would love to hear from you actually about, this is a technique we use in positive psychology all the time, which is tell us about a time when a thing went well. Because if we talk about with negativity and positivity bias, we look for the times when things went well and try to model things after that, because otherwise we'll just remember the bad stuff. So I would love to hear, we're talking about changing beliefs and convergence. Tell me about a time when you changed beliefs on something and it went really well.
I had a meditative experience in 2016 where I kind of got this clear message that if there's something important to be done, I should do it now. And I just started doing that. Like every time I was like, I'm thinking about something, like, is that important? Like, yeah, it is. And it's like, do it now. Like, okay. And I just did it. And what followed was producing a whole web series and a shoestring budget and on politics and spirituality. And it just, it was amazing what we accomplished in about 4 or 5 months. It's just amazing. And it was exhausting, but it was sort of like the highest productivity level I'd been in maybe since high school or ever,
Wow, that's amazing. And it started from your just getting an intuitive hit and following that down.
Yeah.
I love that. I think that happens all the time. And I even though that's something that is outside the realm of what psychologists study, I'm a big believer in doing that and always trusting your gut, because there's a lot more than meets the eye going on.
Yeah. Well, did you want to build? Do I need to give you something else to build on with a positive belief or a?
No, I think that's pretty good as far as how you went about it, and it relating to yourself. So, how did you enroll other people in your vision?
I just kept telling them why I was doing it. I just kept saying, hey, we're really polarized and this has been an issue for a while. I've got this story about a spiritual guru who breaks down the political divide and pulls us together under our shared values. And we've been to realize, oh yeah, we are just two sides of the same coin. This is what we've been talking about all this time. We just stopped communicating. We started yelling, and let's get back into dialogue. And he does it in this humorous way that's ridiculous. And we make, we have these great jokes where people are doing ridiculously polarized things and everyone can laugh at themselves and each other on something that's ultimately quite hot button. And you've heard of Jonathan Haidt's work, right? Jonathan Haidt,
absolutely.
Moral Psychology.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So I love thinking about these moral foundations that are sort of universal in across cultures.
Yeah.
Fairness, compassion, liberty, authority, loyalty, and then sanctity. And the sanctity one seems to me like it's a joker. It's a wild card. It can apply to anything depending on your culture. Whatever you find to be sacred is not just negotiable.
It's true. And something is, no matter what, wherever you're coming from.
Right. And so this kind of, we can be, the sacredness can be labeled on top of anything, really. Because you see in some cultures, they don't give a damn about that value at all. And then in other cultures, how dare you? We will kill you. We will end your life for even saying that.
Exactly.
So it's like when you begin to see how arbitrary many of these are, like, yes, we have a freedom instinct, the liberty one. Yes, we have a fairness instinct, or at least we want to make sure no one gets more than we do. And yes, we have a compassion instinct, and that's very important to us.
And I think that's something that's really important to remember, because again, with the positivity and the negativity bias, we forget that, we focus on like in an evolutionary sense, competition, but it actually takes the other forces of making a wide variety of things and also cooperating, having those wide diversity of things cooperate to make evolution work. It's not just all about competition. So going back, but in a leadership sense, commenting on what you just said, the idea of having people share your vision is pretty much the most important thing for getting people on board and leaving them room where they can help interpret it as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I knew I needed a lot of creative input, a lot of help.
Yeah.
And so I invited a lot of people in, and I could have done it better, most certainly, but it was, the energy was right. Everyone wanted to do something that was different and was hammering at these issues from a more sarcastic approach, and they liked that there was this healing element to the idea. I think that it was like, we're not satisfied just being hating of the other group. We're not satisfied with that position. We know it's more nuanced than that, and we'd like to see it dissected. And to me, that the values, this is really it, and this is what I'm still so much about, is that when we really do dig under the slab of our reactive minds and we get to the underbelly of our values, they are, one, mostly very universal, and two, the ones that are not, we don't quite see eye to eye on, we are two sides of the same coin. And so it's like, if we could just dig deep enough to understand these and then get philosophical about these values and go, well, so life is important to me. I do believe in the sanctity of life. It's like, well, then you must be pro-life then and not pro-choice. But well, yes, but it's like, like I think it's sad every time an abortion happens. I don't just feel like it's, who cares? It's like, no, it hurts. It hurts. And I bet you it hurts the mother too.
Well, we're a long way from a society that is centered around supporting the human lifespan. If we really want to be a pro-life society, then the effects of our actions on human lives should be at the center, and we're a long way from that. We're mostly, and I say we as in the U.S. and the culture that has propagated at this point, are very much about individual achievement and numbers on a page. And until we really recenter around what does it take to support human life and value human life, which I think is coming in the next age as AI becomes more of a thing. I think we're going to start, my prediction, at least this is where I'm putting my own little, checkers on the table, is that we're going to start questioning what is humanity good for, since AI is so much better at almost everything that we currently value. And then we're going to have to think about how do we recenter human life and make all of this work for all of us, rather than rather than doing it the way we're doing it now.
Awesome. Well, Kim, thank you so much for talking with me. This has been wonderful.
How fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Got it. Everyone, have a great day, and we'll tune in next time.
All right. Bye-bye.